Welcome to the Business Trendsetter podcast, where we talk about trends and how to grow your business. My name is Manny Turan.
And I'm Adam Hartung.
We are Spark Partners. To learn about how to grow your business, go to our website at sparkpartners.com. And, we talk about a lot of things here at Spark Partners, in particular, all about trends and understanding your customers. But trends, and by their very nature, and customers don't operate in a vacuum. And there's always going to be the tug and the push and the pull of different dynamics, human dynamics, when it comes to how decisions are made within the company, and then how the rest of the world reacts. And so on today's podcast, we want to sort of explore the idea of a true pivot, a true strategic pivot. And one of my favorite examples, of course, is we've talked about this in the past, is that, of course, of Netflix. Netflix has gone through a couple different pivots, and in doing so has maintained their position as the top of the entertainment food chain. But people that are on the stock side, who are stockholders, don't always like that. And so let's talk about that, Adam. Let's start talking about the Netflix dynamic and what happened there, and then sort of dovetail into things that are happening with some of our favorite companies that we talk about, and others like Ford. And let's go from there. So what are your thoughts on what happened with Netflix? And let's talk about that.
Well, I think Netflix is a pretty well-run company, and they pivoted a couple of times. Now, what's a strategic pivot? Let's remind the audience. It's when you change your value delivery system to align it with your value proposition. And what we're saying there is that the reason customers value is your value proposition. How you deliver value is your value delivery system. That day-to-day activity of your value delivery system, it can become irrelevant. Just think about Sears. Sears was in the retail business. They were delivering products. They used the mail order for a long time, and then they pivoted to traditional stores. That was successful. But then when electronic commerce came along, they did not change their value delivery system. They stayed with the retail stores, and new retailers that were undercutting them on price, like Walmart in the traditional market, but more importantly, the advent of electronic commerce, meant that here was a new delivery system that attacked the old delivery system, and Sears did not pivot, did not change its value delivery system. And even though it had a great brand name and brand names like Craftsman tools that were really thought well of, even though it had Kenmore appliances, even though it had these brand names and it had a customer base and it had loyalty, they lost the war, and they're defunct now. And that's because of the fact they didn't pivot or change their value delivery system. And the reason we like to talk about Netflix is that Netflix started out delivering DVDs to your home, but then as new technologies evolved, they realized they could have a new value delivery system, and that would be streaming. And at much to, over a lot of work, they decided, we're going to have to downplay the physical thing. So all the people we've hired, the logistics people and all that, we're going to have to let those go and replace them with technology people that can help us get into streaming and moving streaming forward as a technology.
Right. And when they did that, what happened? How did the stock market react to that?
Yeah. So the stock crashed. The reality was that they had gone from adjusted for changes in the number of shares, that splits and that kind of thing. They had gone from $20 to $300 a share in the elimination of Blockbuster and winning the war against Blockbuster. But whenever they announced that they were going to change their value delivery system, the stock fell from $300 a share to $50 a share. It was a huge cutback. And that's because the people on the outside that look at a company, industry analysts in particular, they don't really look at value propositions. They don't think like strategists. They very much look at a value delivery system. They think of that as an asset, and they think about, how do I maximize the deployment of the asset? The reality that an asset could become obsolete, like all those Sears stores could become completely obsolete, they don't address that. You don't see analysts say, I think all these retail stores are going to go obsolete, so I'm going to put a very low value on them, and the only way for Sears to be successful is to do something different. Instead, they'll say, here's an asset. It should be able to generate returns for a long time into the future. And that's the second part. They always talk about returns, meaning they're talking about earnings, earnings and earnings per share. And the reality of strategy today, and the reason strategic pivots are important, is because from the time business strategy was born in 1980s up to the year 2000, there was a lot of focus on returns. I'm focusing on better businesses, meaning more efficiency, better operations, tighter ship, more, better, faster, cheaper. That was a lot of what we did in strategic planning, more, better, faster, cheaper. And the objective was to improve returns and earnings per share. And Netflix, again, gives us great insight because in 2004, when they first started to really hurt Blockbuster's revenue declined from 2004 to 2005. And the CEO, Wayne Huyzenga, said, don't worry about that revenue decline. That's not a big deal. I can cut my costs and I can maintain my earnings. We just have a few too many stores. And I'm going to protect my earnings and my earnings per share. In 2005 to 2006, revenues declined again. Now, we've talked about growth stalls and how deadly growth stalls are. That was clearly, you only need 2 quarters to have a growth stall. You had 8. And so now the company's in this growth stall. What's happening in the growth stall? Customers are starting to leave. So they're saying, I'm buying fewer DVDs in the store and I'm getting more DVDs delivered elsewhere. So they're a combination of what Netflix was doing in terms of use of DVDs and the sale. Just the fact that people start buying more DVDs instead of renting DVDs was hurting Blockbuster. And so now what happens is, they should pivot. That's what they should do. And Wayne Huyzenga was offered the opportunity to buy Netflix. They say, hey, here's Netflix. You can buy it in 2006. Yeah. And he turned it down. And he said, I'm not going to buy Netflix because I have my earnings. And if I buy Netflix, it has the value I would have to pay for it, how much I would have to pay for that company. And it has so few assets. And the price I pay compared to revenues means that my earnings per share would decline. So this decline in earnings per share would hurt my shareholders. So to protect my shareholders and protect my earnings, I am going to continue cost cutting and I will not buy Netflix. And he turned it down in 2006 and he turned it down again in 2007. Yeah. And by 2010, Blockbuster had gone bankrupt. They were completely out of business. So if we look from a strategist point of view, and what I hope our listeners take, the point of view they take, is that you're thinking about the long-term business. You're thinking about your sustainability. When we want to sustain our business long-term, we have to really look at revenues. Where are the revenues going? And if revenues are going away, we can't really defend and extend our business, right? Yeah. Nobody ever saved their way to prosperity. That doesn't happen. And Blockbuster is a great example of that. We're cutting costs. We saw it happen again at Sears. We saw it happen previously at Woolworths. We can find, if we start tracking Radio Shack, Hostess, remember the great Hostess baking, Wonder Bread, and all that good stuff. When we go look at those stories of failed companies, universally what we see are companies that allowed their revenues to slip away. Instead of saying, hey, I got to keep focusing on my customers, I got to keep growing my revenues, they would do something along the lines of saying, revenues have a problem. I'm therefore going to better manage the business. I'm going to focus on cost reductions. And that inevitably leads them into some sort of a downward spiral that they get into. They should be making that strategic.
Yeah, absolutely. Plan. There's a great book that I read. Yeah, you might have read it. It's called Endurance. It's about Shackleton's exploration of Antarctica and their failed mission. And I always remember that when it comes to this conversation we're having now, if Shackleton would have chosen to, quote unquote, cut costs and focus on doing what they do best, from an operations perspective, when they were locked in the ice, they would have all died. They would have all died. But what he did, his leadership was, okay, I know that we should probably wait it out, but I also know that unless we make a move to these particular islands they're going towards, we're going to die. We're all going to die. And he actually, most of the people that were on that mission survived because of that decision to move forward and look forward instead of backwards. We talk about this a lot, right? If you're in strategic planning, you got to look forward out in the market, not necessarily inside of your own company.
Well, so let's modernize this story because this is happening around us today. The reality is when you're a leader and you say, okay, the market is shifting, my customers are shifting, I need to do new things to grow my revenue. Frequently, you'll find it difficult to get support. People will say, well, do you know how to do that new value delivery system? Like with Netflix, do you know how to be a technology company and stream? No, if you don't, then don't try. And then, of course, they made the next big pivot, which was they started making their own content. People said, well, what do you know about making movies? And if you don't know anything about it, you shouldn't try. But the leadership said, no, our customers, we know our value proposition delivering entertainment, so we're going to get good at the next thing. And that's what so often leaders, they shy off, they quit, they give up because they get a lot of reinforcement to give up. People say, hey, keep doing what you've been doing, cut your costs, focus on your earnings, focus on your cash flow. And if you do that, long term will take care of itself. When in fact, it's the Shackleton effect. You're locking yourself into the ice and you're going to get crushed if you stay on that path. And it's hard. It's hard to fight that war. And Ford's a good example. In 2018, I believe it was, that they said, okay, we're going to discontinue sales of the Ford Taurus. And what effectively that led to was a very quick statement that we're really not going to sell sedans and coupe cars anymore. So that's the big part of the car market, right? I mean, that's your Toyota Camrys, and it was your Ford Tauruses and those kinds of cars. Yeah, and they said, we're not going to do that anymore. Now, on the face of it, that's a drop back out of revenue, and you've got to be very thoughtful. Is that a smart thing to do? Should I let those revenues go away? But their answer to that was really pretty clear. It was, we're in this pitched battle to sell cars against Toyota and everybody. And in that war, we don't make a whole lot of money. We have a lot of employees. We spend a lot of money. We have to keep doing R&D to make the cars better, faster, cheaper. We got to do sustainable innovations or we're not in the game. So we have to keep working at that, but it just doesn't make much money. And what we see is the future's electric. The future's going to be electric. Where are we going to get the money to go fight that war if we keep spending so much money trying to preserve or save the old war? And yeah, we did great with the Taurus for 40 years, but do we want to go and launch that battle again, or do we want to launch into the new battle of electric? So they drop the cars, and all the analysts it's just easy. Go do a Google search, and you'll see how they were just beat the heck up. Then we go to the next step. The next step is, okay, in 2022, March of 22, they make the announcement that they're going to take and create within Ford 2 separate entities. There's going to be Ford Blue, which is the traditional Ford company, and it's going to sell all the pickups and the SUVs and the specialty vehicles like the Mustang, things that you've liked and we make money on. We're going to keep doing that. And we're going to compete out there against Chevrolet and Toyota Tundras, all those good people. And we'll see how well we can do. We do good now. We're number one. But we're going to take and we've created this other company called Ford E. And Ford is an electric car company, and it's going to stand on its own, and it's going to make and sell its own cars in competition with what's happening over at Ford Blue. And so we're going to let the marketplace determine how fast this transition happens. But we're going to downplay the internal combustion engine investments. We're going to shrink those back. We know that that's not a growth market, and we could easily overinvest in that, competing with Toyota and General Motors. So we're going to be careful. We're not going to overinvest in that. We're going to throw our money into the Ford E business. And, of course, they brought out the Mach-E Mustang. That's done very well. They've brought out the Ford Lightning. Both of them have large back orders, much like Tesla had years ago when they were first launching cars. And look, all appearances are they're headed off in the right direction. But if you go look it up, you'll see all these analysts saying, oh, this is really stupid. It's dumb. You've duplicated your overhead. You've duplicated your accountants and all that. And, we really think that's just a foolish idea. And you should not be wasting that money. And this, of course, at the same time, what's happened is they've downplayed their what we would call the luxury car brand, which was Lincoln. So the Lincoln brand was the Cadillac. And if you kind of look at it, both those brands have done poorly in competition with offshore competitors, especially German competitors. And so the luxury car market is more moved off towards the German competitors and the Japanese. I mean, Infiniti is another good brand. And what they're screaming now is, well, shut down Lincoln. Just shut it down. Quit it. Save the money. Save costs. And I don't have a good answer for that right now, because I have noticed that the car they're really pushing is the electronic Aviator, which is a hybrid. And they're selling that. Now, are they selling the number of cars they did back in the day when they had T-Birds and we had Lincoln Navigators, that everybody wanted a giant Lincoln Navigator? No, they're not selling the volume they used to sell. Right. But perhaps they're in a good position there to come out with something that can compete with Tesla as the party goes on. So, but what I want to get to again is, as a strategist, I can look at this and I can be very complimentary of what the leadership of Ford is doing. And I can say that I'm really sure that the analysts are short-sighted and they're only looking at earnings and they're wanting them to cut costs. And they're saying that they're looking at ways of competing that are just out of date, right? Yeah. But if you're the CEO or on the executive team or the board of Ford, it's not fun. You're not having meetings and getting told that the analysts hate you and that you're an idiot. And, it would be a very, very unpleasant place to be these days. And so it is a battle that we're still having, in that our leaders often will find themselves in a leadership position that's tough. It's very tough. Now, part of the solution to this is to be sure that you're telling a good revenue story. So if you got a good revenue story and say, I'm giving up some earnings short term to keep my revenues today and to grow my revenues. Now that's where we can turn to Disney. You and I had one of these podcasts about 3 or 4 years ago. I think it was very early in the pandemic, in which Iger left and this guy Chapek took over. And I was scratching my head and I was like, oh man, I wouldn't get near that because the fellow Chapek, he had a background in amusement parks. And I'm looking and I'm saying, okay, here we got this pandemic. Amusement parks are not on an uphill trend. That is not where I would want to go invest a lot of money. The second thing is you're making big movies that are coming out in theaters and people have quit going to theaters. Now they're not a good trend. The pandemic hit and that shut both of them down.
Right.
So here's the new CEO and they're closing these businesses temporarily because of the pandemic. And I was like, really, they got to be rethinking their strategy, rethinking where they're going. And to my surprise, they did. Chapek turned around completely.
He did a great job. He did a great job.
Yeah. Unlike the stripes of the tiger that he was, he learned how to look around. He said, okay, I want to de-emphasize the amusement parks coming out of this. I'm going to de-emphasize the theaters. And he put all this energy into Disney Plus. So here you had Netflix that was the Tesla of its market, right? Tesla's got so many sales of electric vehicles beyond everybody else, right? They're way up on a plane themselves. That's where Netflix was. Well, they come out with this Disney launch, and it's Disney Plus launch. It's $6.99 to sign up. And even Chapek says that's an insanely low price. But what does he do? Blows the doors off. People at $6.99 rush in, and he actually makes a difference on Netflix, which looked impossible. It didn't look like anybody could catch Netflix, but he did. He really made a run at it, and he got a huge volume of users. Now, doing that cost him earnings. So what we had a pandemic. We lose the earnings from the amusement parks. We lose the earnings from the theaters. So he redirects, and he says, we're not going to put money there, but we are going to put money in content creation for online, much like Netflix has done. So we're going to do a lot more releases direct to online, far fewer releases to the theater, all on trend. And what we're going to do is we're going to get all this big base of users, and then we're going to start, raising prices and offering them more content, and, we'll reprice it and come up with ways to generate more revenue per user. Again, from what I think it's a fantastic strategy, well thought out, all on trend. And then,
except for then what happens?
He gets fired. And why does he get fired? Because a bunch of analysts say there's not enough earnings there. Instead of looking at the big success that has happened, in that we've got continued to have the amusement parks. Those amusement parks, they didn't do away with it, but they've got control of the costs and putting the money into growing the next big thing. Instead of saying, oh, that's really smart, what they're saying is, well, you didn't get the earnings, so we want you fired. And the board knuckled under and fired, and they brought Iger back. Iger comes in, and then
from retirement, we might say he was doing
back from retirement, and he relaunches. Says, this is my plan, and it's basically the same plan that Chapek had, which was we're going to raise the price from $6.99, and so if you don't want to see any ads, it's going to cost you either $10.99, $11.99, somewhere like that per month. If you're willing to take some ads along the way, we want to raise it up to $8 or $9 per month. So he's going to generate more revenue, and but the worst part is he's going to cut costs in that business. So the Disney streaming business and the making movies for direct release to streaming businesses is where he's going to cut costs. Now that's foolhardy, because that's the trend, and that's where they ought to go. Now, if he really believed in this is something I believe in. This is a belief I have, because it's a human thing, and that is he's paid $25 million a year. He was asked if, now that he's the CEO, would he give up part of that $25 million? Give it up for the future. When we saw Steve Jobs did this when he returned to Apple, for example, he said, "I'll waive my salary. I'm going to take $1, and then perhaps if you don't want to just give it up entirely, we'll trade it. We'll give you stock shares instead of giving you money, and that way you can, if your strategy's right, long term, you'll make a fortune, like Bezos did, or like Tesla's leader Elon Musk did."
Elon Musk.
He will not do that. He has not agreed to change his compensation plan.
Really?
He wants the $25 million cash. Now I'm like,
okay. He's basically a mercenary at that stage.
Guy's got to have at least $500, $600 million from his years of running Disney, all the stock options he had, how much he was paid. It's got to have $500 million of wealth. Right, so it's not like he needs $25 million. He can fly his private jets. He's the CEO again, so now his private jets are free again. He's got all these perks that go along with being a CEO. Plus, he's just doing well. And the reality is, why wouldn't you give that up if you believed in this long-term strategy? But again, what we see is, I don't think he does, because I don't think he really understands what's going on. He ran the old Disney. Chapek was creating the new Disney. He's now coming back. And he wants to try to recreate the old Disney, I guess. I don't know where he's trying to go.
Yeah, he wants the whole name of the game is he wants to decentralize decision making is what he wants to do.
Well, that's easy to say, but decentralizing decision making, I think is code in his case for how to cut costs. I want to decentralize by demanding down through the organization people are going to figure out who to fire, because now everybody's got the fire everyone bug, right? We got it happening all over Silicon Valley. Now, how many, all the tech companies, how many people are you going to lay off? We've gone to, it's a fad. Again, trends versus fads.
Yeah.
Right now we have a fad, and that fad is, we're going to have a recession, like we haven't already caused one by Jerome Powell and his actions. And so, the fad is fire people, and that'll make the analysts happy. Again, catering to analysts is the dumbest thing any CEO can do. They don't care about you. They don't care about your company. They get paid millions of dollars to write reports and move money around, and they have no responsibility of any kind whatsoever. Yeah. If an analyst is 100% off recommending you buy a stock that drops 50%, he doesn't get put in jail. He usually doesn't even get fired. In the worst case, someone will say, let's take him off that account and put him on something else for a while, right? Because we don't want his name to be associated with that. Or worse, they'll just say, we're going to drop coverage. Oh, great. So you told me to buy the stock. It went to pot, and now you're going to drop coverage on me. Oh, how thoughtful of you. That's kind of the way those guys behave. Now, I want to make one more step in this logic to help the folks that we talk to.
Lay it on.
Back again to revenues and how important it is to continue to grow revenues. When I look at the FANG stock, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, and Google, and you can throw Microsoft in there too if you want. What we've seen is in the last few quarters and projecting out for the next 4 quarters, all of those but one are projecting year-over-year revenue growth. So even though they had fantastic years in 19, 20, 21, those years were great. And they call them pandemic years now. When we brought revenue forward, all these discussions. Yeah. All of those companies except one are saying, I can continue to maintain and grow my revenues. And I'm having to make some transitions into new businesses. Microsoft all into Azure and where they're going with that. Great, going to the future. But their revenues are not going down. Their revenues are continuing to go up. If we look at Netflix is now getting into gaming. We haven't seen it big yet, but they're getting into gaming. In the process, they've said we're going to clamp down on password stealing. Yep. We're going to start to introduce a new product that has ads in it. Why do they do that? Because they say, don't let the revenues go down. Don't lose the customer. Got to make sure we get our share. So they keep investing in that. Apple, again, investing in products, having some supply chain problems, continues to work with that, figuring out how can we get more software sales, software as a service sales, more app sales, everything through the channel. And so that continued to drive revenue up again. Google, same thing. You can scream and cry and holler, advertising revenues are down versus what they were before. But Google has said, it's okay. We've got some new revenue streams coming through the YouTube line. We're going to continue to push on the traditional Google ads, and revenues will maintain or go up. But Meta did something very different. And there they said, we are going to start to make massive investments of cash in a new business. Now, when Meta got into Instagram, it was an acquisition. They took shares that they ran off their own printing press, handed them to somebody, said these shares are worth $1 billion. Give us your company. When they acquired WhatsApp, same thing. Turned on the printing press, made some shares, handed them to the company, gave them $19 billion of shares, and then they got into business. Now what they've said is we're going to grow, develop, create the metaverse. We're going to be a leader in it. But the money for that is coming out of their own pocket. They're not using shares. They're using.
Why is that?
I would guess that they don't see that there's a viable acquisition that would lead them there.
Roll their own.
Yeah, so they're going to do it themselves. So that's a big difference. It's a big difference growing, and they bought into those businesses saying, boom, we acquire this, it's here, it's operational, we make some improvements, and then we go after the revenues. We monetize the product in a way that the original founder couldn't. Here, they've got to build the product and then monetize the product. In doing this, their revenues have gone down. They have hit a growth stall. They have had 2 consecutive quarters of declining revenues.
Right. And just for the listeners, remind everybody what that means on both a quarter over quarter and a year over year basis.
Yeah. So if your revenues stall, meaning that they've gone down 2 consecutive quarters or 2 quarters versus a year ago, right? Your revenues are down for 2 consecutive quarters, back to back or versus the previous year. That's a growth stall. Why is that crucial? Because we've been studying growth stalls now for almost 20 years. And just that 2-quarter negative revenue situation means that you have about a 93% probability of stalling your company. Now, It could be as bad as stalling an airplane, and you'll decline and go away quickly, like in 2 or 3 years. About a third of companies, that's what happens to them, about 28%. That'll happen to them. Then there'll be the kind that get a growth, that get a stall that's more like a stalled engine on a car. We'll do badly, it won't run, and then we'll hit it, and tinker, and it'll sputter to life for a little while, and then we'll get down the road a bit, and then it'll quit. It'll stall out.
A bit like the movie theaters, we'll say.
Yeah. So, it'll be that sputtering car phenomenon. That'll be about 35% of companies that'll have that phenomenon, and they're going to survive. It won't be anything fun to work at because it's, you're not really growing. You're not making much money. You're not making enough money to pay well, hire good people, do a lot of training. You don't have any money for that, but you don't die, and you'll stick around for, 7, 8, 10 years. And then there'll be about 20% of people, in there, another third. So about 30%, 30%, getting to 90% roughly in there. That'll sit there and they'll be stalled out, but they'll be kind of like Grandpa in the Lazy Boy. In other words, we're just kind of like cruising, and we're not making a lot of investments, but we're trying to manage earnings, and we hope the business will just hang around for a few years. That's General Motors, for example. Who wants to own General Motors stock, right? It hasn't done anything for 50 years. So that's the third level of the growth stall. You only have about 7 to 10% chance of ever getting back in front of it and becoming an exciting company again.
Yeah.
Now, I want all of our listeners, if you ever hit a growth stall, I want all of you to get over it and be one of the 10%ers. But the reality is you're fighting a tough battle because the fact that you hit a growth stall means that you've missed something.
There's some foundational issues there.
Yeah, you've not kept up with the market. You've not kept up with your customers. And this is what the fear I have as a strategist for Meta and its Facebook product. They are still a huge company, and they are still selling a lot of ads, and they have a lot of cash. They are not going to fail. That is not going to happen soon. But their price has cratered. Would I say, go buy more of that stock if if I was at a cocktail reception? Remember, we don't make stock recommendations. But I would tell people to start saying, I would say, I'm not sure that they know exactly what their future is. I don't hear exactly what the metaverse is. But in the meantime, they're not keeping their main business going. They're not continuing to sell. So if you think about Ford, it shrunk its main business, but it said, we're going to keep being successful selling internal combustion engine cars. We're going to keep doing that. Disney, we're not going to invest a lot in amusement parks and theater releases, but we're going to keep doing it because we're going to keep up with our customers. There's still a market for that. We're going to stay with it. Google, same thing. Netflix, same thing. We're keeping investments at a very low level in the old stuff, but enough that we can keep our customers and we can keep growing. In Facebook, they haven't. They've shifted so much money into the metaverse investments that they've not kept their eye on investments enough on the ball, and their revenues will have 3 consecutive quarters of year-over-year revenue decline. That's worrisome. That's very, very worrisome because they've got to be darn right on this metaverse thing. There's not much room for error. Now, take, for example, when Netflix was launching streaming, they kept the distribution of DVDs alive. They didn't shut it off and quit doing it. They kept it alive, the minimal investment, until we get the next one running. When they went into content, they didn't turn off all the old content, all the reruns and everything else. They kept those going, and they added their new content, right, to keep growing revenue. And what we see at Facebook is there's now not paying enough attention to that original business. And so, yes, it's worthwhile to be worried about that. So I think our base needs to, we're trying to kind of do with these modernistic stories of Disney, Ford, and Facebook, Meta, is keep people, remind people that the number one thing we have to do as a company is sell more stuff. We just have to sell stuff. If you don't sell stuff, you don't have a company, right? I don't care what. You've got to sell stuff.
You've got to sell stuff. I ask people, we talk about, we're obviously a growth strategy innovation company. And I ask questions of how do you grow a company? And people don't know the answer right away. And they say, well, you just have, you have more stuff and you have this. And they don't know the only way you grow is by selling more stuff. And in particular, you sell more stuff of what people want to buy.
Yep.
And that of people want to buy bit is the whole idea of trends. And if you're not something in trend, people are not going to buy it.
Yep. And we can learn from these lessons that these modern companies, big companies, they prove out every year what we know about strategy today. Just what you said. Know where the customer is, know what the trends are, know your value proposition, and keep reinvesting in your value proposition. When you have to change your value delivery system, do so. Don't be surprised if people get angry at you. Don't be surprised if it's difficult to make big changes in your value delivery system. But if you don't, you'll be the next Sears or the next, Blockbuster or the next Radio Shack. Right?
Yeah, and let's be clear about this. Adam and I talk primarily of these giant mega companies, but all of this that we talk about can be applied to your own company, right? To be applied to what you're doing in your small software company, or if you've got a handful of car repair shops. Are you really investing in what's happening in the future? If you're a car repair company, you should maybe start looking at being able to repair some of these electric cars and things of that nature. And it's all applicable to any level of company. And just like we've talked about these different, whether they're a stalled company or not, all that can also happen to you. If you're stalling 2 consecutive quarters, you should really look at what you're delivering, the value that you're delivering to your customers.
Yeah. And know that value proposition. I drum this into everybody's heads when I meet with them, and everybody shakes their head, yeah. And then I say, well, tell me your value proposition. And almost nobody can. It's a pretty big struggle.
Yeah.
And that's where you want to start. But to do that, you got to take a little time away from managing the business day to day, quit focusing on the value delivery system for a little while to do that. And that can just be really, really hard because you get rewarded for focusing on the value delivery system. For years, we've heard focus on your core, from the old gurus of the past. They said that's the thing to do, even though I can't even think of their names now. And most people out there can't think of their names, right? Because they did not, those processes, those approaches that focus on execution did not work. They did not work, and they do not help you have a sustainable, successful long-term company. But focusing on revenues, that can. That is the most important thing every CEO needs to know is you've got to have revenues, even if it's not where you came from. If you came from finance or you came from operations, it doesn't matter.
Success hides lots of sins.
Right? Oh, my gosh. Revenue growth can hide a lot of sins. You're absolutely correct about that, Manny.
All right. Well, very good. Very well said, Adam. Any final thoughts before we log off from today's podcast?
I hope everyone is going to have a great holiday season 2022.
Absolutely. And I think next time we should talk about, Adam, some things that we should be looking at and preparing for the new year. Obviously, the new year is just a month away. And even though it doesn't really mean anything to some people, it's just another passing day. To a lot of people, that demarcation of one year to the next means a lot. And so with that, thank you for your time, Adam. And we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you, Manny.
Cheers.